So maybe in 12 months' time, where do you think we'll be? Do you think we'll be in a situation where more than half companies are back to 4 days a week in the office?
I think we're going to see, my guess, and nobody knows, my guess is we're going to see a divergence. And I think the divergence will come down to culture, because that's what we're already seeing. So if you're a Goldman or a JP Morgan, you're a very prestigious brand, you're the kind of brand where somebody wants to call their mother and say, I've just been hired by Goldman. And the mother's going to go down the street and tell all of the neighbours and be super proud, and you pay well, you have £1 billion office in the centre of town with a gym and a nursery. Do you know what? You can get away with 5 days a week. I think those organisations will do it. They're not going to struggle. My guess, you would know better than I would, to recruit. I understand that they're not struggling. I think they can be very clear and very confident. I think for organizations that don't have a brand that people call their mother about, that don't pay very generously, they are going to need to be more responsive to the talent in the workforce in order to be able to recruit.
It handled well, we should see an increase in happiness, because bear in mind, okay, I'm not pro-remote working, I'm pro-choice, to borrow, a phrase. And this is an artificial experiment, because in many cases we've been confined to our homes. I think our experience was probably better in the summer, where you could kind of work outside as well. If you had a little bit of garden or something, there was something rather pleasant about that. It's worth remembering that when you do an office job, you sell 5/7 of your daylight to your employer. Our job of Ogilvy, we want to pay our staff. We don't exist to fund buy-to-let landlords. And so offering people free, what I call free where and free when, is the whole of labour economics assumed that it was all about you sacrificed leisure for work and you were paid compensation. That's why your pay is called compensation. You are paid to sacrifice you for your loss of leisure. What we never explored was that maybe people didn't want to work less. They just wanted to work at a time that suited them and in a place that suited them. That was more valuable to them than actually less work.
I joined the army aged 23 in 1985, and most of my schooling to that date had been single sex, and I could say that the ambitions and expectations on the girls had been not overly high. In addition, the attitudes and behaviours that I had been shaped by the judgments of society on what a woman could, should, or couldn't and shouldn't be or do. I think mindset can be both an enabler and a blockage. Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So my approach came to be always to think that I can, because the institutional cards might have been stacked against me, but I didn't want one of the key barriers to my success to be me personally.
To start with, education is, I think, is an incredibly important part of my life, and I think that really comes from my parents. My parents, right from an early age, drilled down the importance of education for us, for everyone really, but specifically in our lives, they drilled down, especially my dad. He made sure that we knew that education was the key to success. I think I'll probably say it's the same in all successful, highly successful teams, or all teams that want to be consistently successful. It's you have to be in it together. No man is an island. You can't achieve anything by yourself, especially in a game like rugby.
Business, I think, actually, in business as employer, I think has, if anything, just as important a role as government. Because if we work and if we have a workplace, that is where we spend most of our our waking hours. We get home, we spend a third of the day, if we're lucky, asleep. We spend quite a lot of the time traveling around the place. Work is fundamental to who we are as people and to our health and our well-being. And I also think that there's a selfish reason for employers to take this far more seriously. A happy, healthy workforce is going to be a more productive workforce. One of the most important things I discovered when doing the research for the book. I went to interview a woman in Canada. And actually, I went to interview her because she's a geneticist. And I was exploring whether there's a genetic element to mental illness. And, you know, because I've got quite a bit of suicide on one side of the family, quite a lot of alcoholism, quite a lot of depression. So I'm exploring that. And anyway, this woman, Janine Austin, she was called, she basically said, there's a long answer to this, but the short answer is no, it's not genetic in the way that some conditions like Huntington's disease, where it comes directly through that gene.
But not all adverse mental health is trauma-based. Please hear me. You know, you may have a genetic predisposition. The heritability studies are incredibly compelling. But just like Adam said there in the intro, do you know, an extended period of stress or pressure can leave you susceptible to adverse mental health, especially depression. Do you know how long an extended period is according to NICE? 6 weeks. 6 weeks of stress. We've just come through 18 months of a global pandemic, for goodness sake. Please hear me, we are all currently susceptible.
And that was a lesson that I learned early on, that, you know, you're going to have to apply yourself, Michael, just as much as you do to running what you love. You have to apply that same sort of energy, that same sort of dedication to all of the other fundamental things that it takes to be a great sprinter or great at anything, but just as much. You know, people will ask me all of the time, you know, hey, is it more strength or is it more speed? Is it more physical or is it more mental? It's both. And what I learned early in my career is that anything that impacts on performance is important. And it's so important that I want to be 100% proficient in every one of those areas, as opposed to, well, it's more physical than it is mental, so I'm going to spend more time on the physical.
You mentioned earlier when I joked that you said you're not a current athlete. I'm intrigued. Do you run the 200 meters now? At what time would you make?
Here's what I would not run the 200 meters now, but here's what I know. It would be significantly slower than I used to run it. And I have really no interest in knowing how much slower I am now than I was then. See, as an athlete, my perspective would be different from yours. Yours is, how fast would you be now, Michael? But for me, it's, how much slower would I be now than I was then? And I don't really want to know.
Like we always say, work used to be a place you went. Now it's a thing you do. And this is even before COVID, right? Because we have access to, to our data constantly wherever we are. So we need to set up some artificial boundaries because the physical boundaries are no longer there, right? So there's a few things that I think are useful. Interestingly enough, just as an aside, when we look, my background is in psychoneuroimmunology, and so I kind of look at how the mind affects the body, the immune system. The vast majority of heart attacks happen on a Monday morning. I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think there's research that shows it's this mental shift between where I am and the relaxation on a Sunday to all those shoulds and have-tos, that cognitive shift on a Monday that raises that anxiety. Also, there's something really important about setting realistic goals. Look, the only way our confidence increases, right, is doing the stuff we didn't think we could do. But if I'm sitting on the couch all day and I try and run a marathon, I'm going to fail, and that's going to plummet my confidence. If instead I go around the block and then I run around the block and then I do 2 blocks, that incremental rise, and again, we've seen so much research from the 50s onward that's done a lot around behavioral science with this. It's the way to do it. So realistic goals, action versus outcome, and find out a realistic why.
Human Forward. Randstad.